Well, good morning, everyone. I've put together a little presentation on the changes to the rules of golf for 2023. We're going to go through that. Hopefully, if you have any questions, ask that along the way. There is a little chat function here that I have opened up in case you want to type something in. The rules of golf changes for 2023 were not that significant because a lot of things were done during 2019, 2020, and 2021. In most cases, a lot of the changes were just those things getting written into the rules. But you'll get, if you see my screen here, if you're curious, this is the view from behind the 10th tee at Twin Warriors Golf Club before I think the third round of the senior professional championship, pre-dawn. That's morning twilight there. So it was a little bit scenic, but it was also very cold. You can't see that in the picture. All right, we're going to cover a few changes to the rule book, some updated terminology. There's a new 25th rule. For 3 years, for 4 years, we've had Rule 1 through 24, and we now have Rule 25. Our penalty strokes, if we substitute a ball when we're not allowed. We're going to talk about a little change to our back on the line drops if we take relief on the back on the line. An exception when a ball at rest moves, and some interesting things about handicaps on scorecards if you're running a handicap, and requirements to sign your scorecard at the end of your round. And there's I'm going to talk a little bit about some model local rules. Our first thing, let's talk about the rule book and official guide. In 2019, the USGA came out with 3 versions of the rule book. There was a player's edition, and the player's edition didn't include everything. It was a shortened version meant to be simpler, and apparently they didn't sell very many. So the player's edition has gone away. Your 2 options for the new rules are the actual rule book itself, and then also along with that, the official guide to the rules. The official guide is similar to what used to be considered the older decision book that has committee procedures and additional things in it. In addition to that, what you really want, it'll be good to have those, but what you really want is to have the app on your phone. The USGA has an app that can be downloaded to iOS or Android. And that's what you're really going to want to have. In pre-2019, we had a rule book, and then we had a decision book, and then we had decisions on the rules of golf. In 2019, that changed. They changed some terminology. We had a rule book. The name of the decisions book changed to the official guide, and decisions became interpretations. And then they also had clarifications that were on top of the interpretations. And I think they figured out that that was a little bit too much, just not easy to follow. So in 2023, we have the rule book, we still have the official guide, and in the official guide are clarifications. The term interpretations has gone away. The official guide has clarifications, and the USGA will still quarterly put out any needed additional clarifications. And that's one of the good reasons to use the app. If the USGA updates anything as we go through this cycle, the new rules of golf are going into effect January 1, 2023. There is a 4-year revision cycle. The expectation is that there will be no major revision to the rules until 2027. However, if the USGA and RNA come across anything that they feel needs to be updated before then, they can do that through a clarification that they'll issue quarterly. Any of those clarifications will appear when issued in the mobile app. So I'm going to have a rule book, I'm going to have the official guide, but I have the mobile app on my phone. And for the average user, I think the mobile app is probably the easiest way to go. The mobile app is searchable, and that's the really big key. If you're not that familiar with it, when you go in the mobile app, there is a search function, and you can type in penalty area, or you can type ball at rest moved, or you can type 14 clubs, and whatever, it'll search that thing and take you to options of the appropriate rules. And that has been a really good function. I've even used that when the rule book changed in 2019. All the rule orders got revised, and even for a few years, I had a hard time finding things in the new rule book. I use the search function in the app all the time. Now that we're 4 years into the revised rules, I feel like I have a better handle on where everything is in the new book. But I still occasionally use the search feature if I can't find it right away. So that's really where we're going with what books you should have, and you should definitely have the mobile app on your phone. We added a 25th rule that'll become effective on January 1 when the new rules kick in, but it's really not a big rule. Rule 25 is a rule that are modifications for players with disabilities. These modifications for players with disabilities used to be in the committee procedures. So this was something that you could go find back in the committee procedures book if you wanted to use it. It's been brought into the rules of golf and is a rules of golf that is always there. As a committee running a tournament, if you have any handicapped people participating, a committee running a competition would create something that says when this rule can apply. The rule's always in effect, but a committee would have to say what are the criteria to use the modifications for someone who is blind, or what are the criteria for someone who has other types of disabilities. That Rule 25 has multiple sections, and I can tell you, I haven't looked at it really other than to look at the overview. This is something to just know about at this point, and it's something to dig into deeper if you get into where you're going to run an event where you have someone in it where this might apply. There are separate subsections for blindness, amputees, people using assisted mobility devices, including carts like solo rider carts, modifications for intellectual disabilities, and then general provisions for all disabilities. If you, this is something to get into deeper if you think it's going to come up at an event that you're running, but probably not coming up at most golf tournaments. There is a section in the committee procedures. The committee procedures are in the back of the big official guide, and they can also be accessed through the app that goes into this more in depth, and that's what you would want to look at if this is going to apply. One of the bigger changes that came out that will take effect January 1 is a modification of the penalty for substituting a ball when not allowed. Under the current rules and how it has been for a long time, a player who substituted a ball when not allowed to substitute always got the general penalty. They got 2 strokes in stroke play, or 1 stroke, 2 strokes in stroke play and loss of hole in match play. That, if you noticed in 2019, when you can substitute a ball was liberalized dramatically. Now there are many more times when you can substitute a ball during the course of playing a hole than there used to be. Really, the exception now is when you can't substitute a ball. But if you do substitute a ball when not allowed, the penalty, instead of being 2 strokes in stroke play or loss of hole in match play, is now 1 penalty stroke, excuse me, in both stroke play and match play. So if a player substitute a ball when not allowed, for example, on my screen, I have a picture of a guy replacing his ball on the putting green. You know, if you have that player that wants to put down their lucky putting ball when it's time to putt on the putting green, substituting that ball when not allowed is going to incur a 1-stroke penalty. And once the player plays the stroke, there's no correcting that. Playing a stroke at a ball substituted when not allowed is our point of no return, after which the penalty applies and there's no correcting that. And since this is something that changed in 2019, I thought I'd just do a brief overview of when you're allowed to substitute a ball and when you're not allowed to substitute a ball. This is a change that goes back to 2019. You may substitute a ball anytime you're taking relief under a rule, including dropping or placing a ball. You may use either the original ball or another ball. And so this is pretty wide ranging. It's easier to understand if you look at the times that you're not allowed to substitute a ball. You're not allowed to substitute a ball when replacing it on a spot. So that ball lifted from the putting green must be replaced on the same spot. If your ball at rest was moved by yourself or someone else, you must replace the ball on the spot. There are other times, perhaps you've lifted a ball for identification, or you've lifted a ball to see if it's cut or cracked. You know, any of these times where you're lifting a ball and replacing it on the spot where it was lifted or moved from, you're not allowed to substitute a ball. If someone substitutes a ball in one of these situations, the penalty is now 1 penalty stroke, and they can, once they play a stroke with that substituted ball, they can't go back. There is, Rule 14.5 covers correcting a mistake in taking relief, substituting a ball or playing from a wrong place. And it does say that once you've played a stroke at that incorrectly substituted ball, the penalty applies, and you can't correct that. Just keep playing with the substituted ball. We're also going to talk about our back on the line relief changed a little bit from what it went to in 2019. They changed the back on the line relief procedure in 2019, and I think there was a good amount of confusion about it. And we're largely going back to something that's more similar to what we were doing before 2019 than what we did for the last 5 years. A player taking back on the line relief. So here, our example is we're taking back on the line relief from a penalty area using the point where a ball lost cross to go back on the line, or we're taking an unplayable perhaps to go back on the line. The ball is going to be dropped on the line. And when the ball dropped on the line, it's going to create a relief area that's 1 club length, and the ball needs to come to rest in that relief area. If you remember, the rule that began in 2019 that would be in effect right now, that will change on January 1st when this goes into effect, the rule, many players dropped on the line, but the rule allowed you to mark a spot on that line and then drop within a club length of the line. And that turned out to be more problematic and confusing than what it was worth. And we are back to dropping on the line when taking back on the line relief. Any situation where we're taking back on the line, Rule 1.3b2 talks about accepting a player's reasonable judgment when determining the point where a ball crossed the edge of a penalty area, or a spot for replacing a ball, or a line when taking this back on the line relief. So the back on the line relief, the player has to determine that back on the line, which sometimes is hard to do. You know, you might have you're trying to go back on the line from a flag on a dog-leg hole where you can't see the flag, or to an elevated green where you can't see a flag. There are times when we have to determine back on the line from the flag, and we can't see the flag, and some estimating has to occur. The rule, if there's a question about this, Rule 1.3b2 talks about accepting a player's reasonable judgment when determining this back on the line. And as long as the player uses reasonable judgment in determining that line and makes a reasonable judgment effort in dropping on the line, it's going to be accepted that they were successful in doing that. When the player drops in thus back on the line situation, the ball must come to rest from where it hits within 1 club length of where the ball hits on the line. When the ball is dropped on that line, it creates a reference point for that player to take relief. The ball must come to rest in that 1 club length area. There is an exception if you went back on the line, say very close to where your ball crossed the edge of a penalty area. It's within 1 club length, but it can't be closer to the hole than where your ball previously was if you're taking it unplayable, or from where your ball crossed the edge of a penalty area if you're taking penalty area relief. So it's fairly straightforward. I think this is simpler than what we were doing 2019 through 2022. I like this change, and I think we just need to, we're back on the line, we're dropping on the line, ball must come to rest within a club length of where it hits when dropped on the line. Something else that came into the rules in 2019 was restrictions on restrictions on a caddy standing behind a player when they're taking a stance to help them with alignment. And when this was first put into effect in 2019, in the first month or two, there were some penalties applied, and the USGA issued a lot of clarifications to try to get this a little clearer. The real restriction is that the rules describe a restricted area for the caddy before a player makes a stroke, that they can't stand behind the player when the player is taking their stance for the purpose of assisting the player with alignment. And this brings up the idea of this restricted area behind the player for the caddy when the player is taking their stance for a stroke. That restricted area, we have a little internal definition in the rules of it's on or close to an extension of the line of play behind the ball. And the caddy must not stand in that restricted area to help the player with aiming. And that's kind of an emphasis here. What the rules don't want is a caddy standing back there to help a player with aiming. And this includes if the caddy moves away without saying anything, but by not saying anything is giving a signal to the player that they're aimed properly. If a caddy is back there when they shouldn't be, there's no penalty if the player backs away before making the stroke, and if the caddy moves away from the area before the player begins to take their stroke again. But the emphasis is that the caddy cannot give help with aiming. A caddy could be back there for some other reason. For example, a player is taking a stance in a bush or under a tree, and maybe the caddy's helping determine whether the player's backswing is going to hit a tree. Or the caddy is standing back there for no reason at all. The caddy's not paying attention. The real restriction here is a caddy standing in this restricted area behind the player for the purpose of helping the player align for the stroke. And that's what, since this went into effect in 2019, I've really seen very few penalties for it. The first year, there were some issues, particularly with caddies at, say, junior events or high school events, or at events where the word that you couldn't do this hadn't gotten out. But once this became more of a common thing and people understood that it's not allowed. I haven't seen very many instances of this recently. But still, even if the caddy is back there for another reason, they need to move away before the stroke is made. And we need to make sure that this is not something they do on every stroke. A caddy that was doing this all the time, we would need to have a conversation with them because we need to know why they're back there in that area. Again, no penalty if the caddy is inadvertently standing back behind the player when they make a stroke. Maybe the caddy is looking somewhere else, not paying attention. It is a restricted area, but it's restricted for the purpose of helping the player. There's not a penalty if it's accidental and the caddy is not helping the player. And this is some new text that is coming in for 2023. It says, this rule does not prohibit the player from having a person other than the caddy stand in that restricted area behind the person to help track the flight of the ball. You know, we've all played early in the morning or late in the day and you're teeing off into the sun. It's hard to follow the flight of the ball. We're saying the caddy shouldn't be back behind right behind the player when they're playing a stroke, but it's not a problem to position somebody else back there, again, for the purpose of helping track the flight of the ball. We do want to restrict the area behind a player when they play a stroke, but we don't want to say you can't get someone to help you see where that ball goes after a stroke. So that's, you know, a lot of these things are fairly common sense, and it seems to be. I mean, to me, I feel very positive about these updates to the rules of golf because there's something that many of them are common sense things. You know, we're better defining what the penalty is for and better defining, in this instance of caddy alignment, what the penalty is not for. We do have an exception that's related. This got Ricky Fowler in the last year on the PGA Tour. I think it also got Charlie Hoffman in the last year on the PGA Tour, and has happened occasionally. And we have an exception to Rule 9.3. If a player taking relief puts the original ball or another ball into play by dropping, placing, or replacing it, and after they put it into play, natural forces cause the ball at rest to move and to come to rest in another area of the course or out of bounds, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. And again, I think I have a little video here of what happened with Ricky Fowler. So if you're on the phone and just listening on audio, this probably isn't going to help you out a little bit, but I'll talk you. This is Ricky Fowler had an instance where he took relief from the penalty area right next to a putting green. He dropped twice. It rolled out of the relief area both times. He then placed it on a slope. Between the time that he placed it and the time that he played, it rolled back into the penalty area. And under the current rules, well, that's just unfortunate. And I can tell you players don't like to hear that's unfortunate. And going forward, starting in 2021, if this happens and the ball rolls into another area of the course, such as from the general area into a penalty area or the general area into a bunker, or rolls and comes to rest out of bounds, the ball will be replaced on its original spot. Well, let me see.
Raj, it appears that Fowler has dropped the ball twice and the ball's gone back into the penalty area.
That's correct, Gary. So now placing the ball where the ball struck the course on the second crop.
He's in a tough spot here, and
I mean, you could really have issues.
I mean, with a good shot from this indication of how closely mown the grass is, how steep the bank is, Ricky's looking, that's crazy. That's how that ball sat there for all that time.
So if you're listening on the phone, the ball at that point, they say that's crazy. The ball rolls back into the penalty area. If that happens now, the player would be able to place another ball on that spot for no penalty. And that's a good change. It's a pretty straightforward change. The only thing I worry about, we already had a rule that once a ball is lifted and replaced on the putting green, you own that spot. You know, if this was already a thing starting in 2019 on the putting green, anytime you lift and replace a ball on the putting green, you will always play from that spot, even if it moves due to natural forces. I'm a little concerned that someone might misunderstand this and replace a ball that doesn't roll into another area of the course. If this was a steep slope with no penalty area and the ball just rolls down the steep slope and comes to rest at the bottom of the slope, then that's okay. You know, that this doesn't apply. The nuance here is that this only applies if the ball rolls and comes to rest in another area of the course, or in the really unfortunate event that it were to roll and come to rest out of bounds. In those cases, we are going to continue to place the ball on that spot. We have some player-friendly changes to handicaps on scorecards and handicap competitions, and to certification requirements. And in the rules of golf, certification is you need to sign your scorecard when you're done with your round. There's a little change here. In a handicap event, the rules right now and previous to 2023 in a handicap event required the players to write their handicap on the scorecard before turning it in. Don't know if this was always enforced or not, but that's what the rule was. And the rule has changed for beginning in January 2023. It's the committee's responsibility to do that. Players will no longer be penalized or face repercussions if they have a wrong handicap on their card when they turn it in a handicap competition. That's up to the committee. That's up to us. If we're running the tournament, that's our responsibility to make sure the handicaps are correct. In a handicap match, players still have to announce the right handicap at the beginning of the match, but where we're turning in a scorecard, the requirement has changed. And this is what I have here. And this doesn't happen a lot. Say you have 3 or 4 players in a group. If a player and one of those players is keeping another player's scorecard, one of the players in the group has to leave during the round. So someone else who's there has to keep the card for the rest of the round. The current rule is that both of the markers should sign that card. A line has been added to Rule 33B that says if the player had more than one marker, each marker must certify the scores for the holes where they were the marker. But if one of the markers saw the player play all of the holes, that marker may certify the score for all of the holes, which is that line is added. Any player that has seen the player play all of the holes may certify all of the holes. This really reflects reality. In any USGA 18 or 36 hole qualifier or a PGA Tour Monday qualifier, there's always players who withdraw when they know they can't make it, and another player in the group often signs for the score. This has the rule reflecting something that was already largely happening in events. But if you're in an event and one player has to withdraw, another player in the group can just sign for the scorecard for the whole round. And that's a good change. There's another change here that if a player at the end of your round, if the player hasn't signed their scorecard or if the marker hasn't signed their scorecard, the rule 33B2 is what applies. The rule says the player is disqualified, and it's been that way for a long time. But we now have a model local rule that is very player friendly. And I can tell you that the USGA will be using this at all USGA events starting in 2023. The PGA Tour and associated tours will be using this. I expect the PGA of America to also be using this. So this is something that I would go ahead and put into a hard card or anything that you're using. is Model Local Rule L1. It's a modification for a missing player or marker certification. And this is handling what happens if a player doesn't sign their scorecard or the marker doesn't sign the scorecard. If a player returns a scorecard, this is the model local rule. If a player, it's rule L1. If a player returns a scorecard without the whole scores being certified, either by the player, the marker, or both, the player gets the general penalty, 2 strokes, and the penalty applies to the last hole of the player's round. So we can have a situation where a player that turns in their scorecard that's missing a signature, either by the player, the marker, or both. If you have this model local rule in effect, the player would get a general penalty of 2 strokes added to their score, and that would apply to the last hole of the round. And this is something that the USGA is going to use, the PGA Tour is going to use. I'm going to use it at any event that I run, and it would be good, something good for you to use at events going forward. It looks like there is a movement away from disqualifying players for a missing signature and instead turning that into a general penalty. At this point, it's a model local rule. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets written into the rules in 2027 when the rules are next modified, but for right now, it's going to be a model local rule that the USGA, the PGA Tour, the PGA of America, I expect that all major governing bodies that run tournaments are going to use this rule, and I would suggest that you use it at any event that you're running. There's also another one for there, and there's a model local rule. It's model local rule G9, and the way that I need to back up a little bit to explain the history of why model local rule G9. The rules of golf always work by setting up a default position, and then there are often exceptions to that default position. The default position in 2019 was that you could not replace clubs damaged during the course of the round. And we started 2019 like that, and there was a lot of unhappiness, particularly at the professional tour level. And the USGA created a model local rule called G9 that specifies that that except in cases of abuse, a club that's damaged in the normal course of play can be repaired or replaced. And that has been in effect at all events, all major events, USGA, PGA Tour, PGA of America, European Tour, since mid-2019. What the rules are doing for 2023 is they're reversing the default position. The default position is now that if a club is damaged during a round or while play is stopped, except in the cases of abuse, the player may repair it or replace it with any club. The default position in the rule is changing from may not replace to may replace any club that is damaged during a round or while play is stopped, except in cases of abuse, the player can repair it or replace it. Now, that begs the question of when is a club damaged? Is a club damaged if I get a nick on the face of my club because I hit my 5-iron off the cart path? You know, is a club damaged because I have a nick on the face of my sand wedge because my sand wedge hit a stone when I played out of the bunker? So model local rule G9 is again going to be used by all of these major organizations to limit the replacement of clubs to when there's more than minor damage. I have a video for the people on the phone. That was Ernie Els breaking a club when he hits a tree during his swing.
He wasn't holding back, Peter.
No, he wasn't.
And there's another one coming up with a player,
Struggled yesterday.
Thomas Peters. If you're watching, that's abuse. for people on the phone, Thomas Peters hit a shot he didn't like and then snapped his club over his shoulders. So Ernie Els can replace his club because it was damaged in the normal course of play. Thomas Peters, that falls under, that's abuse. So he's not going to be able to replace that club. And the rule says no matter what the nature or cause of the damage, even if it's on purpose, the club is conforming for the rest of the round. So they could continue in the unlikely event, say somebody breaks a putter purposely, and they have now a very short putter, it is considered conforming for the rest of the round and could be used. Except in cases of abuse, the player may repair or replace a damaged club damaged during the round with another club. Now, we do have, and this is Model Local Rule G9, the USGA is going to use it, the PGA Tour is going to use it, the PGA of America is going to use it. I use it at events I run. It basically keeps the rule the same as it has been by restricting, it really clarifies what is damage. And it says that a broken club is not significantly damaged if it just has a crack. It can only be replaced as broken or significantly damaged, and then defines broken or significantly damaged as when the shaft breaks, splinters, or is bent but not dented. The club face is visibly deformed, but not a club face that's only scratched or cracked. The club head is visibly or significantly deformed, but not if a club head only has a crack in it, and the club head is detached or loose, or the grip is loose, and it calls out that a club face or club head is not broken or significantly damaged only if it has a crack in it. So that's where the USGA, PGA of America, PGA Tour, European Tour are going to be for all of their events. You could do this for your events, or you can just say any damage. If you don't have Model Local Rule G9, then any damage they can replace the club or repair it. It does kind of create a loophole if you don't use that somebody could replace a club for very minor damage, but maybe that's not a concern. Damage during a round means when the club's playing characteristics are changed because of any act during the round, whether by the player or another person. Some examples are making a stroke or practice stroke, putting your club in or out of the golf bag. Could be the golf bag falling off of a golf cart, dropping the club, leaning on the club, or otherwise abusing the club, all count as damage during a round. And so here, what we will see is that Model Local Rules L1 and G9 are going to be used by the USGA, PGA of America, PGA Tour at all of their events. I would recommend at least using Model Local Rule L1, covering the reduction of disqualification to a 2-stroke penalty in the event a scorecard does not get certified. If you want to use this, there's a couple ways you can do it. On a notice to players, you could add a statement like Model Local Rules L1 and G9 as written in the 2023 official guide to the rules of golf are in effect. That would get it done. Or you could, the tour and the USGA on their hard cards are listing them separately by saying, by really just saying what it is and saying Model Local Rule G9 as prescribed in Section 8 is in effect, and Model Local Rule L1 as prescribed in Section 8 of the committee procedures is in effect. Any of those things on a notice to competitors or on a hard card gets that job done. And here is what I have on the screen for those watching online. This is the 2023 USGA hard card for local rules in terms of competition that will be in effect at all of their championships. That is available online at usga.org. If you'd like to see what the USGA is doing, it's on their 2023 Rules of Golf resources page. If you go to usga.org they have a page that covers all of the 2023 updates to the rules of golf. I have a couple more things. The one ball rule, local rule G4. And I'm including this just so you know about it. The penalty, but I would say if you're using the one ball rule, you probably shouldn't be. The one ball rule is recommended for use in competitions limited to highly skilled players, that is, professional competitions or elite amateur competitions. The PGA of America does not use the one ball rule at any PGA of America events. PGA of America does not use the one ball rule at the PGA Championship, the Senior PGA Championship, the Women's PGA Championship, the PGA Professional Championship, the Senior Professional Championship, the Assistants Professional Champs. We don't use it and haven't used it for 15 plus years. It's just not something to be worried about. The penalty, if someone uses the one ball rule, used to be 2 strokes at any hole where you used a ball that they knew was in breach of the one ball rule. That has been reduced to 1 penalty stroke. But generally, unless you're running a tour event or you're running a national, the USGA does not use the one ball rule at their amateur events. They do use it at their professional events. The PGA Tour does use this. So if you're running one of those events, you can use it. But for club play, local championships, we probably shouldn't use it. For those of you on the computer, I included this slide just because it was right next to a slide that I was using anyway, and it's a slow motion of a really good golf swing. And so that was just to break up all the rules of golf stuff with something that I hope you would appreciate as fun to watch. There is a new clarification that has related to stand-up putters. A few putters that stand on their own are up, and clarification 10.2b1 says use of a self-standing putter for alignment help is not allowed. The key here is for alignment help. These self-standing putters, if a player wants to use it, that's fine. I have 2 pictures on the screen where a player has one of these self-standing putters on the putting green behind a ball, and they're back behind it to see if it's aligned properly. Using it this way will be a violation of Rule 10.2b, which is going to get you the general penalty of loss of hole in match play or 2 strokes in stroke play. Now, this doesn't say you can't use this putter. You can use the putter. You can use it to make strokes. You just can't place it behind your ball and then go back behind the ball and look at it. If you want to have one of these putters and use it normally and not stand behind it to aim it, then it's okay to use. Just want to be clear that this clarification is not saying you can't use one of these putters. You just can't use it in a way to assist you in aligning the putter before you make a stroke. You can't set it down in the standing position and then go behind it to check and see where you're going. There's also, and I'm getting near the end here, there's a change. Rule 1.3c4 covers when players have multiple breaches of a rule. And it doesn't come up a whole lot, but say, for example, somebody takes a practice stroke in a bunker before playing a shot. Whether they play 1 practice stroke or whether they play 4 practice strokes that all hit the sand in the bunker before a shot. What this does is says if a player incurs multiple penalties for the same time or multiple penalties for the same or different rules, the penalties are combined unless there has been an intervening event. There are 2 intervening events, which are completion of the stroke and becoming aware of the breach of a rule. So if a player in a bunker takes 4 practice swings that all hit the sand, they're just going to get 1 general penalty. If they take a practice swing in a bunker and then play a stroke and the ball doesn't get out of a bunker, and then they play another practice swing that hits the sand. Now we have two different events, and we have two different two-stroke penalties. It would be the same thing if they're made aware of the penalty. If a player plays a practice stroke that hits the sand in a bunker, and another player tells them, hey, you know, you're not allowed to hit the sand with those practice strokes, and then they do it again because they're aware of the breach, then it becomes two separate things. But without a stroke and without awareness of that breach, those penalties would be combined. It could also be another good example is if you're lifting a ball for identification. You've hit a shot and you're trying to find your ball. You're allowed to lift the ball for identification, but you have to mark it, and you're not allowed to clean it more than needed to identify it. If you didn't mark it, it's one penalty stroke. If you clean it more than allowed, it's one penalty stroke. If you substitute a ball, it's now one penalty stroke. If you did all of those things before playing a stroke, or someone telling you that you can't do them, they would all be combined into one penalty stroke. This is very similar to how it has been the last few years, but it is actually what happened in 2023 is that it got simpler, because there used to be a concept of whether these breaches were related or not, and that concept goes away. There also used to be an intervening act of putting a ball into play, and that goes away. But one exception, anytime a ball at rest is moved and a player is required to replace it, if they fail to replace it and play from the wrong place, that one penalty stroke if the player causes the ball to move. If they don't replace it, they would get two penalty strokes for playing from a wrong place if it's not replaced. Those two penalty strokes always combine, always pick up the one penalty stroke for causing the ball to move. And any penalty strokes for taking relief from a penalty area, or stroking distance, or taking an unplayable, those always apply. If you're taking a penalty stroke to get out of a penalty area, you're playing under stroking distance, or you're taking an unplayable lie relief, that one penalty stroke always applies. If you manage to play from a wrong place when doing one of those things, then you get the penalty stroke under the relief rule and the two strokes for playing from the wrong place. That's a 2 + 1 = 3. And that 1.3C4 is kind of a complicated rule, but it has gotten simpler because a number of criteria that used to be in it have gone away. So that's all I prepared for you this morning. I've covered all the really big things, and I think at this point you're prepared well to go forward with things that have changed for 2023. Are there any questions on that material or anything else someone would like me to go over? I'm going to take that as you've done a wonderful job, Mike, and we all understand everything.
I appreciate it. Thank you for doing this for us.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. I want to thank everyone that joined this. Hopefully, you'll see some information about some more of these rules of golf presentations coming out, and we'll try to put them out as we go into the new year. Thank you.